I think, Mr. Grazzer, your question was, did Mr. McCormick ever consider an agreement to exceed RSIS standards in order to address the concerns of the Fire Bureau?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
Is it not apparent to you in reading the report of the fire official that he would consider it to be desirable if, in fact, those standards were exceeded?
It seems like that is his position.
Okay.
Concerns that the fire official had. It was my understanding that, although I wasn't part of the conversation, that those issues were satisfactorily addressed. All of his issues were satisfactorily addressed, with the exception of the 30-foot roadway issue.
Okay. In other words, the gentleman who was the author of that report was steadfast in his position that the road width had to be 30 feet.
That's not what I said.
Pardon me?
That's not what I said.
Okay, just tell me what you said so I understand it.
Well, I could read it back to you. I wasn't in the
I
conversation.
understand that.
My understanding of the conversation is he was satisfied with all issues in his report and issues that he raised, which may or may not have been in his report, other than the 30-foot wide issue. That's all I know about
Okay.
what he said.
That's fair enough. Now, did you personally make any attempt to determine the firefighting apparatus that was available to fight a fire at this site?
I did not.
Thank you. I have no further questions. It was just retained recently with regard to my appearance before the planning board. I secured copies of all the documents. I am not personally aware of any case dealing with firefighting apparatus. However, to me, it's just common sense. If you have a development that is intense and you don't have a fire department, or you don't have the firefighting abilities to protect it, and it's unprotected, it's no different than not having availability of sewer or availability of water or other such items. You very clearly in your ordinances say you call for a report from your fire bureau. He is saying we don't have the type of equipment that can enter onto this site and fight a fire.
Hold on, can you just read to me, where in the report did he say that?
I don't see anything at all like that.
Mr. Junko, I'm asking him a question about that. I mean, there was a statement that they reject the RSIS and requirements, but I don't remember there being a statement about our fire apparatus.
It says the proposed roadway widths and cul-de-sac radius are inadequate for the effective use and placement of emergency services equipment. That's what he says. And I will also,
I'm sorry, was it?
I'm sorry,
He said inadequate or ineffective, what was that?
I'll read it to you. He says the proposed roadway widths and cul-de-sac radius, if applicable, are inadequate for the effective use and placement of emergency services equipment. Then he goes on to say, quote, not approved as submitted, bullet point 1, roadways throughout the complex need to be 30-foot wide for proper operation and placement of fire apparatus during emergency operations, end quote. That's what it says.
All right, but there's no statement that it's the structures themselves that are inhibiting fire. It's not too high, if they don't have ladders that wouldn't reach or anything like that. It's the road network, not the structures themselves, right?
You're absolutely correct. He isn't saying that we don't have a ladder vehicle, we don't have sufficient water capacity to fight a fire. As I read this, he's saying that the roadways, as they are laid out, we are not able to bring our equipment onto this site to properly fight a fire.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make an objection at this point.
Go ahead, Mr. Junko.
When we look at that report, the first thing it says is position statement : and then it goes on to say that it supports the concept and use of the project, but then in quotes, it then does not support the RSIS. I think that we have to accept that this report simply is stating the fire department's, this fire official's comment that he doesn't support RSIS. There is nothing in this report that says it doesn't apply. There's nothing in the law that says it doesn't apply. In fact, there is case law the opposite that says it does apply, even if someone in the municipality chooses to reject it. This testimony and this line of questioning is being cast in the methodology to try and persuade the board that somehow that position statement has validity based on a fact of equipment, and there is no mention of that.
Well, I think the document speaks for itself. When it comes time to deliberate, the board will determine, what they take from that document, what it means, and, the weight it's going to assign to it.
May I make a comment? And I apologize for interrupting, Mr. Cucchiaro. It's really a very simple answer to this. I mean, the board calls for its planner to comment about the plans. The board calls upon you to offer legal advice. The board calls upon its engineer to review plans. Call the gentleman who's the author of this document and ask him. It's as simple as that, isn't it?
I don't necessarily think so. I think they have provided a document. The board, if the Fire Bureau wanted to be here, they could be here. Are you asking the board to subpoena?
Yes.
Well, the other one, I know it's just me, but I'm compelled to say that maybe they should just get something from the fire official to say that they were comfortable with the radius.
So let me address this, and I don't know if Gatto wanted to, but I understand your point. I've been sitting up here for over 10 years, and that statement, that standard position, comes up in every application that involves RSIS. I have personally spoken to, because as a new board member, I was curious as to why that always came up, and did speak to the former chief. And it was just a position that they had, but assured me, and I want to assure all the residents here, that there was never a safety issue, because we do have developments that are RSIS and that fire apparatus could get to. So I just want to put it on the record that that is a standard position that comes in every application that this planning board sees. And that's just their position. So I could feel comfortable to say that I don't believe that this is going to jeopardize the safety and the welfare of the residents. I've been on many fire calls in a capacity, and have seen our volunteers and our fire departments do amazing things. So I understand the position, but for me, I've seen that all the time, and I don't feel that there is a safety issue that's going to affect our residents. And I want the residents, because you have a job to do as an attorney, I want the residents to know that they could go home and sleep at night. And regardless of how they feel about this plan, that plan, from the fire perspective, is going to be safe. So that's what I have to say about that.
I'm going to object.
Listen, I'll go first. It's been a long road on this. I understand this is probably the most difficult project for our town and our community to have listened to, gone through all of the steps that got us to this point, all the things that aren't germane to this planning board, but these are things that got us here. All these conversations about affordable housing and a pilot and all these things, and we're finally here. So as a member of the planning board, I haven't heard any justifiable reason, as hard as I've looked, to consider not to approve this, with one exception that did get raised tonight. And if you've heard me at these board meetings, particularly in the last month or so, I think Chief Kudrick always talks about the safety because he's the police chief, and somehow I always get kind of asked the questions about fire safety because I happen to be a township fire chief. And I think it bears echoing to Deputy Mayor DeCastro's point is I don't think anybody up here would do anything to put anybody in harm's way, but I think the people that are involved in the fire service and fire safety every day, that goes a little bit further, I think, more so than other board members. We all have our niche, environmental lighting. I give you a hard time about your lighting all the time. Paul Schneider with his bollards. Mine is fire safety. So whether you believe it or not, but rest assured, I would never rush an application. I would never do anything for any other reason than the basis of the testimony as a planning board member about an application, particularly when it comes to fire safety. I know Chief Lewis, and I can appreciate the comments about asking him to testify. This application has been in the works for 2+ years, and it doesn't look much different than it did the very first day I saw a conceptual plan. I dare say, as well as I know Chief Lewis, if there was a concern, he would have been at this meeting, and he would have told all of us what it was, and we would have listened to it. There's other things that we didn't even talk about. And I brought it up before, if you were at one of the previous meetings, I did ask fire safety questions. I asked where the hydrants were going to be. There were conversations about fire trucks getting through. Something that didn't even come up tonight, I asked if the buildings were going to be sprinklered. The answer was yes. I see all the water main connections. So if we're going to talk about whether this is a safe complex, I dare say, with the protection that's provided, it's going to be one of the safest complexes we have for residential in this town. And we're looking for one reason that came up by an objector, which I completely appreciate and understand. I just don't feel that that's enough of a reason to delay nor to vote no. So for all of those reasons and for all of this long journey, I would like to make a motion to accept this application.